Hello everybody, I'm Peter. I'm actually hanging out over at the OPEZ booth, so even after this, if you have any questions, if it's about solar or about power stations, you can come ask them over there. So we're going to start off basically with just some definitions of things that you might hear, and then I might try to do a little bit more of a description of each one. You hear watts, amperage, and voltage. And those numbers, the wattage is the equals. So if you get a 100-watt panel, that is a voltage and an amperage number on the back of that panel. So it's kind of hard to explain the whole aspect of it, but if you take voltage and multiply it by amperage, you're going to get wattage. So when you have a certain watt panel, you're going to make sure your charge controllers take certain numbers, but that's where wattage is kind of the multiplication of the voltage and the amperage. Amperage is the amount of power that it pushes. The voltage is how much power is available. That's kind of a little bit more of an advanced situation. Kilowatt hour or amp hour, that's something that a lot of people have a hard time converging. It's relatively simple. If you look on the bottom of a toaster and it's going to say it uses 8 amps, 8A, or 8, it might look like a little omega symbol, the ohm symbol. If you use that device for 1 hour, that's going to be 8 amp hours. So however many amps that product uses, if you use it for 1 hour, it turns into an amp hour. That's the same way with wattage. So if you have a 100-watt panel on your roof and you have it out in the sun and it's producing 100 watts for 1 hour, you just produced 1 kilowatt hour of power, 1 watt hour of power, sorry. So it's when you're trying to, there is going to be a breakout as far as if you have a refrigerator, how much power should I use, or if I have this much, how much wattage should I use for this much battery? There's going to be a breakout for that. But if you have any more questions on that, you can come see me at the booth also. PV is photovoltaic. That basically means solar. That means that's the process that the solar panels use to take the sun and produce electricity out of it. When you're installing your systems, all your wires that go on the roof or anything should be a photovoltaic wire. It's a certain wire that we use for solar. It's a high voltage wire. You shouldn't be using any low voltage wire. It should be 600 volts or higher. Charge controllers. So your real basic solar system goes from, you go from panels, solar panels on the roof, you go for wires, and you go into a charge controller. The charge controller takes all the extra voltage and amperage from the panel and turns it into a number that your battery can use to charge. Most solar panels are going to give a way high voltage, maybe over 20 volts or somewhere up to 48 volts, and you can't plug that directly into your battery. You need a charge controller to take that power and turn it into power that your battery can take. So there's two types of different kinds of charge controllers. There's a PWM and there's an MPPT. The PWM is mostly going to be your lower, under $100 charge controllers, 100 or 2 watts of solar they can take. MPPT is a new digital. It's kind of like an analog compared to a digital. The MPPT is going to be all your higher voltage, higher wattage devices. If you're only going to be running a couple 100 watts, you can use a PWM, but the difference between a PWM and an MPPT is if you run too many volts into a PWM, it'll stop and it'll just throw the extra volts away, throw the extra power away, and it'll only give you what it can give you. If you have an MPPT and you go up into higher voltage, the MPPT will actually take that higher voltage and turn it into amperage for you and help push the battery in. So if you have the option to go with a PWM or an MPPT charge controller, I would always try to go with an MPPT charge controller. It's going to give you a much better efficient charge for your batteries. Inverter and converter. A converter is if you have a Class C or a Class A or even some of the Super Bs out here, when you plug in the shore power, it takes that shore power and it goes into the converter and it charges your house batteries. So a converter goes from 120 volts down to 12 volts. An inverter is the complete opposite. So an inverter is what you have in your van or your even Class Cs and stuff. The inverters is what takes the power from your batteries, your 12-volt batteries, and gives you power at your house plugs, the 120. I call them Thomas Train plugs. If you want to be able to power those in your rig, you need an inverter. So those two terms are, converters are usually in your rig already. The inverters is what you have to buy usually. The inverters run off your battery bank. That's the next term, battery bank. A lot of people have a little charger that you can charge your cell phone with on the side, and that's called a battery bank. A battery bank is very simply a bank of batteries. It's multiple batteries wired together into a bank. So you need all that basically for a full-time charge system. One of the batteries now, we're going to do a quick thing about batteries: lead acid, AGM, and lithium batteries. Lead acid and AGM are the batteries that we used to have in the cars, or still do have in the cars, that run it, start it, and all that kind of stuff. They're not really meant for solar. If you go into a lithium battery, they are meant for charging and discharging. When you're running a lead acid or an AGM battery, one of the biggest problems that we see is maintenance of the battery. And knowing what state of charge is. State of charge is actually, it's a very big term. A lot of people aren't able to see a state of charge. You don't have what's called a shunt. Victron makes a really awesome smart shunt. You put it in and you can see a state of charge. Your lead acid and your AGM batteries aren't supposed to be brought down below 50% of the battery. So say we'll use a Trojan T105. It supposedly has 105 amp hours of power in there. Out of that 105, you're only supposed to use 52 and a half of that. A lot of times what will happen is when you get these rigs and you wake up in the morning and your power's still on, you think you're doing great. And then your batteries die after a couple of years. And you get, people say, well, why aren't my batteries lasting 5-6 years? I'm doing the watering, I'm doing all this stuff. If you go below 50% of your AGM or lead acid batteries, it deteriorates the battery very fast. If you can keep it above 50%, you'll keep them at 6 years, 8 years. I've seen AGM batteries last 10 years, as long as you keep them maintained. I have a story about AGM batteries as far as Napa versus Interstate versus Trojan. Those are all the same battery. A lot of people think that it's a better battery. The Trojans are better batteries than the Interstates. I beg to differ. I think, unfortunately, it's the people who buy those batteries. Usually, if somebody buys a Trojan battery, they're using it in a solar system. They maintain it. They add the water to it. They know to keep it above 50% charge. If somebody's buying an Interstate battery to throw in their van to use on solar, they probably don't have a battery monitor, all those kind of things. They're not keeping track of their water. So that same battery will only last 2 years rather than the 8 years. So battery maintenance and state of charge is actually a very big thing as far as van life goes. As far as a full solar system, one of the biggest questions I get asked is how much solar do I need to run my refrigerator? No, it kind of makes you a little cringe. So like solar panels go to a charge controller, and the charge controller goes to your battery. That's where the solar part of the system stops. So a solar system is literally just a battery charger. It's just a battery charging system for your rig. Your rig has a battery in it, and then it goes to an inverter, and that's what you get your power from. So that's the power side of your whole system. So when you're asking me how much solar does it take to run a refrigerator, that's actually not the question. Because your refrigerator, what you need to do is you need to find an inverter that's big enough to run the refrigerator. Then you need to find out how many batteries you need to keep that refrigerator running overnight. Then you need to figure out how much solar power you need to charge those batteries back up the next day. So ideally, you want to get to 100% at least a couple times a week. Batteries, if you can keep them to 100%, they could be more balanced inside, and they'll last you longer also. So there is going to be a breakout session if you actually have more of a question as far as that goes. Like my batteries are dying, and I thought I was doing good. There is going to be a breakout session, I believe, as far as calculating your power needs and calculating what you need as far as batteries and stuff after this. So if that's a question that you have, you can either come see me or you can go to a little breakout session after that. So basically, when I say, people ask me how much of a solar system they should get or how much solar they should put on their van or whatever. Solar panels are actually usually the cheapest part of a solar system. So I tell people to load up solar, put as many panels on that roof as possible. people say sometimes I'm wasting money and such. Well, I have 2,200 watts of solar on my school bus. I have 900 or 600 amp hours of lithium battery, 3,000 watt inverter. I have a beast of a system. I was in Pennsylvania this past year, and it was 85 degrees, a little bit overcast, and it was humid, and I'm not a friend of humidity. So I had my mini split going just for dehydration of the inside of the rig, and I was running out of battery power. And I have a monster system. So the extra solar on my roof is more or less for those days. Right now, the winter time is actually the worst time of the year for solar. The sun is at the most angle, and you have the least amount of hours for solar. One of the other big issues that we get is I had my solar installed in July, and it was working great. And here I am now, and I haven't changed anything. I'm using all the same things, and now my batteries are going dead in the middle of the night. That's because your batteries probably are not getting up to 100% like they were in the summertime, because in the summertime you have, I would say, probably close to twice as much ability to gain power. In the summertime, I can power 2 other people's rigs out of my solar system. In the wintertime right now, even right now and in the long term, there's been a couple days last week I didn't get to 100%, and I have a beast of a system. So going back to that state of charge as far as your batteries go, if you don't know a state of charge, voltage is not the correct way to tell power, how much power is in your battery. If you wake up, if anybody who knows this, if you wake up in the morning and your batteries say 12.6 and you think you're good, and then you turn your coffee pot on and the batteries instantly go down to 11.9, and people are like, oh, my batteries are dead. And then you turn your coffee pot off and it goes back up to 12.8 or 12.6, wherever it was before. That's because the voltage is just, it's how much pressure is there. It's hard to explain real quick, but it's just the available amount of power that's there. As soon as you turn a coffee pot back on, that number turns back up. So you can't really use that number for a state of charge. If I can, even friends, I got a friend over here in the crowd, they come up to me, Pete, I think I need a new battery, or Pete, I think I need new panels. The first thing I do is I put a smart shunt in their rig for them, and I go back a couple days later, and I tell them, well, no, you're just not charging up, or your battery is not getting to 100%, or all these kind of things. You can tell so much from a smart shunt, just for state of charge. I know I've mentioned that a couple times, but it's actually a very important thing to do. So as far as now, the whole solar system, when you're looking at, let's see, wattage of panels and such, when you're trying to put them on your roof, people think you're going to get a power station, or I'm going to use a portable power, and I'm just going to go somewhere and I'm going to put the panels out, and I'm going to be really diligent on it, and as soon as I see the sun, I'm going to put it out there and all that kind of stuff. And that's great until you don't. And that happens all the time. So one of the other kind of the big things I would like to, if I could tell everybody to do this, I know we have portable panels over here, and portable panels have their place, but if you have the ability to put a hard solar panel on the roof of your rig, it's the best thing to do. It's always up there. When you're driving down the street, it's charging your batteries. If you stop at a gas station, it's charging your batteries. When you wake up in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning and it's too cold out there to put that portable panel out, the sun's still charging those panels on the roof. It makes it so that you don't have to do that. Portable panels are great and they have their times, but other than state of charge, one of the other things I would highly recommend is to put panels on the roof of your rigs. I know that a lot of people don't like putting holes in the roof of their rigs. I've put thousands and thousands and thousands of holes in people's rigs. One of my favorite things to do is, as that person that tells me, I don't want to put any holes in my rig, and I'm like, it's okay, we'll make sure. And they're like, okay. And then I'm sitting there I'm drilling on their roof, and they're looking at me, and I'm like, and they're looking at me, and I tell you, knock on wood, I've worked at a local solar company here in town for the past 5 years. We do at least 2 rigs a day, and knock on wood, we've never had anybody come back for a leak in their roof. It's just the way you do it. As long as you do it right, just like everything else, it'll hold on there. I have a school bus with 6 panels. Friends have school buses with 8 panels, 10 panels, 13 panels, or something like that. Put a panel on your roof. It's a big, big thing. So, some common mistakes new people make while installing their own systems. And sometimes people come up to me and say, I thought I was doing the right thing. And I don't think anybody ever does the wrong thing on purpose. You're not sitting there trying to, I hate to use the word burn. I don't want to scare anybody when I say burn down or catch fire, but it is electricity. Okay, so if you don't know what you're doing specifically, have somebody help you. Talk to somebody that knows solar, and then increase it by at least 50%. If you can. I know money sometimes is a limitation, space. I mean, I live in a 36-foot school bus, so my roof is completely empty. I know there's some 40-something foot Class A's out here that I wouldn't even be able to mount this piece of paper on it. If you can, you can. If you can't, you can't. But always try to go a little bit bigger with your system. One of the big things I like to tell people is that a lot of times I go to people's rigs and they don't have solar, and they're sitting there and they've got Lucy lights hanging from the ceiling. And it's a Class C, a full-size Class C. They got Lucy lights and they got candles, and they're just using a little power station over here that they charge up in the car where they're driving around. We don't need solar, Pete. We don't need solar. We just need a little bit. Okay, well, you're my friend, so I'm going to give you a monster system. And then 2 days later, you go over their place and they're microwaving chicken McNuggets. Okay? You don't think you need power until you have it. The idea is to live in our rigs, not to travel through time, not to travel from here to there. It's to live in them. I talked to somebody last night, and it's really nice to be able to go into my bus and just use a plug. I wake up in the morning, I turn my coffee pot on. You know, when it's cold out over these nights, I leave my mini split on overnight. Those are the reasons why you have solar. It's, to charge phones and stuff like that too, but it's also to help us. For full-time livers, you want to be able to live in your rig, and solar is a big aspect of that. Incorrect system sizing, choosing mismatching components, inverters too small for peak loads. Make sure that you look at the loadage. Sometimes a 1,000-watt inverter will have the number 2,000 watts right on the front as big numbers and all that kind of stuff, and then you look underneath it and it says surge wattage. Okay, just make sure that you're getting a surge wattage is like, say your AC, you turn your AC on. As soon as you turn that AC on, it may pull 2,500 watts. But once it's on and running, it may go down to 1,400 watts. So your inverter doesn't need to just handle 1,400 watts. It has to handle that 2,500 watts that it turns on with. So always make sure that your surge wattage and all that kind of stuff. One thing that almost everybody's going to have to do, there's no such thing as a solar system big enough that can run an AC and a microwave and a coffee pot and your charger, all those things. So yes, even me and my bus with all my solar, I try not to run my mini split and I turn my coffee pot on if I'm watching TV or something in the back, just because. So stuff like that, sometimes you still have to manage your things. Ignoring future expansion. Not planning for potential system growth, like adding more panels or batteries. One of the things, when I do solar systems for people, I always use large wire. If I'm putting 100 watts of solar on a rig that I know more panels can fit on, and I'm only installing a really small charge controller, I'll put a fat wire going from the roof down to the charge controller for that person, because I'm pretty sure next month they're going to come and say, well, this is not enough, I need more. So then at that point, all I have to do is put more panels on the roof and put a bigger charge controller. I don't have to add new wire. I don't have to run all that, because that's the hardest part. So if anybody here is going to go to a solar company in town or have somebody do their solar, one of the big things I would say is just make sure it's big enough for me to expand. If you have the option to expand, you always want to make sure that you can go bigger. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the word sucks, but it sucks when you have a small charge controller and you buy a nice Victron 100 by 50, it's $200, you're all happy, and then you decide you need a bigger one. They don't trade them in. So then you're stuck with that little 100 watt, 150 volt inverter charge controller, and then you got to buy a bigger one. It's always just cheaper to buy the bigger one first. If you have the money, buy the bigger one first. Component selection. Using incompatible components. Using a 24 volt panel with a PWM charge controller will be useless. Anything over a 12 volt panel is just all the extra power is going to be thrown away. So a lot of people don't realize that. So they'll get like a 250 watt panel from Santan Solar over here, which if anybody doesn't know Santan Solar, it's in Gilbert, Arizona. They deal with used panels, very cheap panels, quality panels. I use them as much as I can. I have them on top of my bus, and all my friends have them. Like I said, solar panels are usually the cheapest thing. So people say, oh, I can get a 250 watt panel for $100, or I can go to the local store here and buy a 100-watt for $300. Of course, I'm going to go buy the 250. And then you bring it back and you put it on your rig and you put it in your charge controller, and the charge controller doesn't work. It's because it's too big of a panel for your charge controller. So you always got to make sure that what you have or what you're buying is going to work with your rig. I always tell people, like, I get the question, is this going to run this? Is this going to run that? Well, do you have it with you? Most of the time people do. We all live in our rigs. Bring it over here. Plug it in. Try it. Let it run for a half an hour. I'm not, just because I tell you to, I'm a salesman. You know, you don't never believe a salesman. Come on now. You know, I hate to say that, but that's what it is. Even the numbers that are on there, you know, sometimes your coffee pot may use a little more than it says it does. So bring it over, plug it in, let it go, make a pot of coffee. And if it works for you, then it works, rather than having to guess. If you can try things out, stuff like that, or if you have friends that have solar systems, you know, see what they say. Try to use if they have a 2,000 watt inverter and 2 lithium batteries, bring your unit over there and see if you can power it off of them. Stuff like that. Just trying stuff like that. Choosing the wrong charge controller, we kind of talked about that. Choosing a PWM. I would always recommend MPPT. As far as parts around here, if anybody is looking for any solar parts or anything like that, I don't know if I like local, and it turns out we're one of the guys. If on 95 over here, we have a company. It's Off Grid RV, I believe it's called. JT, the owner, a JR. When I do solar jobs for people in the desert, I use him. Thank you very much, brother. He's got really good, he's all Victron. I recommend Victron, and he's got better prices than even Amazon. And he has most things in stock. So if you need something before you leave, I would recommend going down there. And he's actually very knowledgeable also. I would almost say, I believe is it Off Grid RV over here? Off Grid RV on 95. He's kind of towards Parker. It's, you know where the fire department is? If you go down this road right here and turn right on 95 north, he's up there on the left-hand side, Off Grid RV. He's not a guy that's going to try to get over on you. If you go there and you tell him what you got and he tells you that you might want to try this instead, I would think about it. He's not an upsales kind of guy, in my opinion, so I recommend him over there. That's one of the reasons why. Again, back to the wire sizes. I see a lot of systems with undersized wires or no fuses and stuff like that. Undersized wire is expensive. Copper is expensive, I know it. Fuses, a T-fuse for my system cost me about $180. I understand that. That's cheaper than me having to buy a new bus if it burns down. And I'm going to say that out loud. It's the truth. I mean, a lot of times these small wires, it's either going to melt, it's going to stink. Hopefully you smell it before anything else happens. But they're online. You can go online. I actually have a wire guide over here that if you need to, it's basically based on how much amperage you're going to use, not necessarily the voltage. So if you have a 30 amp system and you're running a 30 amp wire, that recommends at least a 10 gauge wire. That's a pretty fat wire. That's fatter than any extension cord you're going to buy in the store. But when you're running your AC, that's why they say don't run ACs off of extension cords, because extension cords are not thick enough. It will run it for sure, but if you feel that cord, it gets hot. Eventually that heat turns into flame. So if you ever need any questions, I don't even care if you text me and say, hey Pete, I got this, what size wire should I use? I'm probably just going to text you back with like a 10 gauge or something. I'm not going to say, hi, how are you doing today maybe? But at least I'll give you an answer, and at least you'll be safe as far as wire size. And proper fusing or lack of fusings that's another big thing. A fuse is meant to protect the wire, not anything else. The fuses are meant to protect the wire that's going between the components. So if you have a 2,000 watt inverter, it's not the inverter that requires the fuse, it's whatever size wire you have. So if you run a number 2 wire that recommends about 100 amps, you would use a 120 amp fuse. The reason for that is if your 2,000 watt inverter ends up pulling the 200 amps that it can, it's going to melt that wire. So before that wire catches fire because it's too small, the fuse pops and power stops. So at that point, you don't have to worry about a fire. So a fuse is more meant to create, is to stop the wire from burning and catching fire. A number 2 wire is only meant to hold 100 amps. For a 2,000 watt inverter, you should be using 2 watt, which can hold 200 amps. At that point, you wouldn't still use the 120 amp fuse because the wire can now handle more amperage than that, and the fuse would pop before you would get to 2,000 watts. At that point, you would bump up to like a 200 or a 250 amp fuse. And this way here, your inverter can pull full power, the wire can handle it, the fuse can handle it, and you get your coffee the next morning, basically. So fuses are a very big thing. Type of fuses are also another big thing. I use ANL fuses for all my charge controllers and stuff like that, and I use what's called a T fuse for my inverters. A T fuse is more of a slow burning breaker fuse. It's not going to just pop like a normal fuse was. It's going to give you a little bit of time to create maybe some smoke, okay? And then it's going to pop. But what it does is it gives you the ability to be able to pull high power for a little bit of time before anything happens. If you pull the same amount of power through a little blade fuse that's in your car, it's going to melt and it's going to pop. So there are different types of fuses for different situations and different applications in the solar system. So again, I know of a site that I got to write down. It actually has all this information down. You can just go on it. You don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to feel like whatever. And just go in there and say, I got this, and what it'll tell you. Poor crimping and loose connections. That's actually, in my opinion, one of the major causes of fires is a loose connection. It creates heat. That heat will create a fire. It's going to happen. If you have your charge controller and it's hanging on your wall like this, and you got wires stuffed in the bottom of it, and you've got them clamped as tight as you can with that screwdriver, those wires like this, and then when you crimp them with your screwdriver, they get flat, and it's copper. So over time, it gets soft. Next thing you know, they get loose, and then they start wiggling. Every time that piece of copper touches the lug, it sparks, and it comes off, and touches the lug, it sparks, and it gets warmer and warmer. It gets worse and worse and worse. I hate when I get to a system, and they're like, oh, I need to change this out. And I'm like, okay, I'm cool, I'm changing it out. And I go to grab the wires to hold it while I'm unscrewing them, and they just come out of the bottom of the charge controller. And I'm like, right on, I just saved this person possibly some headache kind of thing. So when you're putting wires into the bottom of your charge controller, there is such thing as called a Holy zip tie. I don't know if that's a real word, but it's a zip tie that has a hole on it so that you can put a screw through it. Okay, we zip tie the wires, pick them up a little bit, and then zip tie it to the wall so that even if that screw comes out, that wire is still stuffed up inside that charge controller. So a loose connection on a fuse, if you're trying to pull low power, if you're trying to pull 5 amps, 10 amps, it'll probably go through no worries. But if you've got a 150 amp fuse and you're trying to pull 150 amps through it, and it's going like this, that 150 amps is going to create an immense amount of heat, and it's going to cause a fire. So every time you tighten something down, one of the things I think happens a lot of times is you get a washer that is just barely bigger than the bolt, and that washer gets caught inside one of the threads of the bolt, and you tighten the nut down, and it feels like it's tight. And then what happens is you drive down these bumpy roads, and it rattles a little bit, and that washer comes out of that thread of that bolt, goes down, and now the nut's loose. So that fuse is just in there hopping around. If anybody ever works on your vehicle, about a week later, or even a couple days later, depending on how much you drive, I would always go back and just make sure everything's tight. When we put solar panels on people's roofs, we tighten them up, and I tell everybody the same thing. After your first drive, go up there and retighten them, just to make sure. When you're bouncing around, you're doing all this kind of stuff. We have to admit, the things that we do, our vehicles are not meant for it. We're not meant to be driving a house down these bumpy roads. I try to get away from all you guys. I try to go as far away as possible. So I'm going down these bumpy roads and these rocks and stuff like that. They're not meant for it, especially the Class Cs and the Class As. It's hard to turn those into a boondocking situation for us. So whenever we try to do those kind of things, just try to do it as safely as possible, if you can. you should almost have a checklist. Every time you stop, you have a checklist. You go through, you do these things, and before you leave, every time you should have a checklist and you go through and do these things. I'm not saying that you should go check your battery lugs every time, but once a month, what else are we doing? That's the object of this lifestyle, is to be able to have as much time to do what we want to do. And that white hair guy that's around here somewhere, I said it yesterday, he's got a sentence that makes so much sense. It's we're trading costs for convenience. We don't have to pay mortgage, we don't have to pay this, we don't have to pay that. So every once in a while, I got to go around and make sure my nuts and bolts are tight, and I'm good to go. So that's a big thing. If you ever do any work on your systems, just make sure everything's tight. Not securing panels properly to your roof, or not waterproofing them so that they don't leak. If you guys want to put panels on your roof, right on. I'll tell you, when I do my panels, I use what's called lap sealant. It's a Dicor. As far as I know, there's only one company out there that even does the lap sealant. If you look at the case, if you look at the tube, it's a guy with a bald head, looks like Mr. Clean. And there's a leveling, and as a self-leveling and a non-self-leveling version of this Dicor. I get the self-leveling for roofs, and I get the non-self-leveling if I got to do anything on the side. For all the people out there that enjoy watching things paint dry and stuff, put some of this leveling caulk down, and it's awesome. Especially on a nice warm day, it sits there and just turns into a pancake and goes over everything and coats everything over nice and pretty. So what you do is you figure out where you want your panel. I take a black magic marker and I put a dot through the holes where the screws go. I take it up, I pre-drill those holes, and then I put the panel back down, and I pick the leg up and I squirt some Dicor underneath the foot. I put the foot back down, I put my screws through it, and then I cover that whole foot with more Dicor. Dicor is actually a sealant, but it's also an adhesive. There's been times when we've tried taking panels off of people's roofs that had Dicor in it from a couple years ago, and we take the screws out, no problem, and then you're sitting there and you're yanking, and you're trying to pull these things off because of the Dicor. So, in my opinion, the Dicor it's a necessary thing for sealant, but it's also a necessary thing for keeping it on the roof. I'm the person where on a school bus or van, if you have a van, I do use self-tappers, and I don't go all the way through with bolts, and I've never had a problem. I try to keep my panels as close to my roof as possible. I've had gentlemen come by and say, well, I specifically had somebody put 6-inch legs on my panels because I wanted to make sure there's enough airflow going underneath them. A warm panel is less efficient, yes, but not by that much. The loss of efficiency by having your panel in the sun, if you're driving down the road, that panel from being so far off is going to create wind, going to create resistance, and you have more of a chance of that thing being ripped off your roof. As close to your roof as possible always should be the way it is. If you're usually 4 feet are good for the smaller panels, the 200s and below. If you're going to try going with the 250s and up, it's generally a bigger body size. It's a 39 by 65 inch. I would go with 3 feet on either side. You can pick up feet anywhere around here, tilt feet or whatever. All the solar companies around here have them, and they're all pretty much the same thing. Insufficient ventilation for batteries. Many people were thinking I was going to say inverters, charge controllers, but batteries need ventilation also. If you have a lead acid battery, those batteries produce hydrogen gas. That's why they have to be outside of your living space. You cannot have a lead acid battery in the same space that you live in, that you breathe in. The harder you use it and the harder you charge it, the more hydrogen gas is going to come out of that battery. The more you use it, the more you're going to have to replace the water. All that rusting that happens, or not rusting, but the corrosion that happens on top of the batteries, that's the hydrogen gas being released into that area, and that's the corrosion. That's why they recommend not putting inverters or charge controllers in the same bay as lead acid batteries, because that hydrogen gas goes inside the components of the charge controllers and the inverters, and it burns them out from the inside out. If you have an AGM battery, it's a non-vented battery, it's a non-serviced battery. It will still vent if it gets too hot or if it's charged too much. Different story. So those AGM batteries can be put in your living spaces of your rigs. They don't expel that hydrogen gas. It's also, if you go to the store and you have the option of buying lead acid or AGM, I would always recommend AGM, more or less for the fact that you don't have to water them. That's one of the biggest issues with batteries is people just don't put the water in them when they need to put the water in them. Go with an AGM battery and you don't have to worry about that anymore. I personally would say that lithium prices have come down dramatically since 5 years ago. I hate even saying this out loud, but my batteries in my bus I bought 3 years ago, they were $2,200 a piece. I had 3 of them. I can buy that same battery now from a company that I've installed many of them for, many of the new batteries. I can get that battery for about $800 now. And I'm dealing with 300 amp hours. So you buy a 100 amp hour, you can get them for $200 nowadays. You know, so before you go buy new batteries thinking AGM, just automatically thinking that AGM's the battery that you want before price, I would check into lithium batteries. There's a lot of, if anybody asks, I use CHINS, CHIN''S. I'm not sponsored by them. I don't make anything from them. I've installed many of them for people in the desert here. When I install them, I have them charge it. I had them try them out. I say, oh yeah, cool. You bought the battery for this much money. That it can't be a good battery. Turn your microwave on for 5 minutes. All right, well, that's good. All right, so this and that. And then I go through it, and after 20 jobs of using the CHINS batteries, I think they're a good battery. And they're actually a very good price battery. They have the app. Nowadays, I would recommend making sure that you have a battery that has Bluetooth that goes into it, or some sort of Bluetooth reading. That goes back to the state of charge. One of the other things about lithium batteries is it gives you a state of charge right at the battery. So you don't have to worry about having a shunt or any of those kind of things. So a quick example of the state of charge things is when you're in a Class C and you use your generator to charge your lead acid batteries or your AGM batteries, you're charging them because you think they're low. Not because your batteries went low, but you think their batteries are low. So you turn the generator on. And you leave it on for an hour or 2 hours, and you turn the generator off because you think your batteries are up, you're full. If you don't know for sure, that's usually where people come into the problem of, well, I have this big battery bank, but it's dying overnight, and I'm charging it up for an hour with my generator. If you do the math on situations like I have 600 amp hours of battery, if I'm charging at 60 amps, which is a massive amount of power, 60 amps is more than most of your Class C's and Class A's out there are charging when you plug into the shore power. If I'm charging at 60 amps, it's still going to take me 10 hours to charge my batteries. 10 hours at 60 amps. So one of the things that people run into is, oh, I'm going to buy a big battery bank. And then everybody's, oh, I love my battery bank. I can run for 3-4 days without even having to worry about solar. And then the batteries die, and then you hear, oh my God, I hate these batteries. It takes so long to charge them up. It's the same battery bank. You know what I mean? That's the thing is you got to realize that your battery bank is going to take just as long to charge it as it does to discharge it most of the time. Sometimes even longer, because you're discharging it with microwaves that are pulling out 70 or 80 amps, and you're generally charging it with a solar that's giving you 20 or 30 amps. So a lot of times it runs into the point of having to manage your power no matter what you're doing. So with the lithium, now take that generator situation to a lithium battery. In the morning you wake up and you look at your lithium battery app and it says you're at 70%, and you know that you don't use 70% that day, so you don't have to turn the generator on. Or you wake up in the morning and it's at 20% because you didn't charge the day before, so you turn the generator on. And you leave it on until your battery says 100%. And then you shut it off, and you know your battery's full. It's not lying. It's telling you it's 100% fully charged. You don't have to worry about, is it 13.6 volts? Is it 12.86 volts? How come it's at 15 volts? When your battery says 100%, you shut your generator off. So it actually can save you gas as far as your generator goes, but it also makes sure that if you have the right battery bank for your system, then you'll make sure that you're going to have enough batteries to last overnight. So that's the other benefit to lithium batteries. So lithium, even me for choosing batteries, it's not the best situation when you go online, because if you look at Lifetime, they've got 17 different batteries out there, and they're all 100 amp hours. One's Bluetooth, the one's this size, one's that size. It's a hard decision to make, but I would say try to be as thorough as you can and try to get Bluetooth If you're going to be in low temperature, they do have a low temperature battery, a low temp heating battery. What it does is once it gets down to, say, about 5 degrees, a heater inside that battery comes on and warms the battery up so that you can charge it. You shouldn't charge or discharge a battery when it gets down to about 0 degrees unless you have a heating battery, just like you shouldn't use it over above, say, 115, 120. The lithium batteries will have a BMS, a battery management system in them, that'll automatically shut the battery off if you're below that temperature. So if you have a low temp battery, it'll keep that battery up to temp. If you do not have a low temp battery, what I tell people is when you're using that battery, so first thing in the morning, if it's off or if it's not working, try to run, say, charge your cell phone. The little bit of power, sometimes it'll use it. And just by using the battery, it'll warm it up. Just by using electricity, creates heat, and it'll warm that battery up. If that's not enough, I tell people, if you're planning on being in somewhere cold, don't invite me because I'm not going there. But get hand warmers, some kind of the crushable hand warmers you buy at the hardware store, and just keep some of those in the bay with the battery. And if you ever get into that situation where the battery shuts off on you, crush those hand warmers up, put them between the batteries, and a couple minutes later, you should be able to use them. So there are benefits and whatever to the lithiums also. But again, with the price difference in lithium batteries. Now that I say that, one of the disadvantages, or not even disadvantages, but one of the things you have to worry about or make sure of is if your rig is older than, say, 5 or 6 years, the converter that's in it, a lot of times you hear the word not lithium compatible. And people think that, it's not going to charge my lithium battery, so I can't buy a lithium battery. There's a lot of people that I put lithium batteries in their rigs, and their converters are not lithium compatible. What that means is it's not going to charge it to 100%. It means that the settings in it are meant for AGM or lead acid, and it's only going to charge it maybe to 70%, maybe to 75 or 80%, but it won't bring it to 100. If you also have solar, okay, the solar should be lithium compatible, so you don't need to change your converter if you don't want to. Just use the converter when you're shore power. Converter is only used when you're plugged into shore power or your generator's on anyways. So if you're going to be boondocking and you never plan on hooking up to shore power, it doesn't matter whether your converter is lithium compatible or not. You're not ever going to use it. But if you are going to live in the desert and you are going to plug in, if you have solar, then your converter will charge it up to about 70, 75%, and the solar will take it the rest of the way to 100%. So you still can get a lithium battery in some of the older rigs, and yes, your rig isn't designed to have a lithium battery in it, but it will still work. And it will still give you 2 to 3 times more power than the battery that's in your system now. 100 amp hours of lithium is not the same as 100 amp hours of AGM or lead acid. Lithium, the battery management system releases power differently. It'll charge at a higher rate. So you'll feel like that 100 amp hours of lithium is more power than the 100 amp hours of AGM battery. Skipping battery maintenance. Again, we've talked about that. I feel like talking about it again because it is such a big situation, but I'll try not to. Make sure you water your batteries. Overcharging, deep discharging batteries. If you're noticing that you're having to put water in your batteries at least once a week, that tells me that you're using the crap out of those batteries and you're charging them up the next day at high power because you're boiling the battery. You're literally boiling the water out of that and creating steam. So if you're having to put water in your battery at least once a week, you might want to think about adding a couple more batteries. So lead acid and AGM batteries are only meant to release and get charged at a 50 amp rate. So if you try doing more than that, it will do it. But again, you're destroying the battery. That again, you'll bring it down to the 1 year, maybe 2 year lifestyle. Improper grounding. So grounding is one of those things it's weird to say grounding when we're putting solar systems in because we're taking wires and attaching it to the metal frame of the RV that's sitting on rubber tires. So that rig is not insulated. So when you are hooked up to shore power, you are insulated. Okay, so there are times when your rig is grounded. As soon as you plug your rig into a 120 plug or you hook it up to the generator, it does become a grounded system. And that is when you want it to be grounded the most, because you're dealing with the most power. Your 120 is going to give you the availability of up to 100 amps, usually when you're dealing with house power. So as far as grounding everything, when grounding is different than the neutral. Grounding is to help protect you in case something happens inside the device. Say you're dealing with a charge controller and the positive wire touches the body of the charge controller. So if you touch the body, you're going to get shocked. If it's properly grounded, that body actually has a wire that attaches to it and it brings it down to ground. So when that positive wire touches that body, it has a place to go so that when you touch it, you're not going to get shocked. So if there's a grounding lug, and they're usually on every charge controller, every inverter, all that kind of stuff, there's always something on the outside of it with a bolt that has a little, it looks like a line with 3 lines going through it. That means ground. So try to bring that to a frame or a metal part of your rig. And your batteries themselves, you try to bring a wire from the negative post of the batteries to the frame also. And this way here, that's also that's grounding everything from the battery. And if anything does happen and any positives touch the frame, it has a place to go back into the negative post of the battery. So grounding is actually very important, even though I get asked the question a lot. But if you ground it to the frame of the car's not grounded itself, so what's the use? There are times when it comes into case. If you're really worried about that, if you ever go up to Minnesota, North Dakota, you see the oil people, you see in the back of their trucks, they have these little pieces of metal that come down and they actually touch the ground. And that's actually a grounding strap. That's for when those people are around the oil or around anything that's producing fumes. They don't want any sparks whatsoever. So their whole vehicle is literally grounded to the ground. So when they're driving, sometimes you can see little sparks happening. And especially at nighttime. It's kind of cool, but yeah. Forgetting an alternator generator backup. There are points in times for generators. I'm not against generators. I'm against having to hear a generator because a person doesn't want to put solar on. Whatever. That's a pet peeve. Okay, sorry. Generators, you know what? If you're new to the situation, or if you have a Class C that the roof is full and you just can't put enough solar up there, then sometimes you got to use a generator. A generator is just a second way to charge. I would always recommend having at least 2 different ways to charge your batteries. You know, if you have the AC, if you have the solar powered coming in, put a battery charger on it. You can install a converter in your van. A converter is just a battery charger that would run if you have a generator or anything like that. You can't just charge batteries off a generator. You need some kind of a charger. So to have a secondary charging system is a great idea. Now, that being said, your alternator in your vehicles, it charges your battery back up after you start your rig, yes, but it is not a battery charger, it is a battery tender. Meaning, when you start your car up, you're using minuscule power, and then the alternator just charges it back up again. And that's all it's ever meant to do. When I was working here in town, we'd have at least one person a week come in, you guys replace alternators? I was charging my batteries and my alternator died. Most alternators don't have fans on them. They're designed to be used while you're driving down the road and the wind is being blown over the alternator, cooling it down. And it's also not meant to be producing the 80 amps that it can all the time. It's going to burn it out. There are some other alternators that you can buy that are designed to do that. Marine alternators, some alternators that you can buy aftermarket have fans on them. So they're designed to be able to be used while not moving. Usually those are kind of marine or boats, because boats can't go 60 miles an hour down a road. So they have to have them that can cool themselves down. So I would never sit in the desert with my van on charging my house batteries. That's not what you should be doing. That's how you burn out alternators. There are devices that you can put in place that you power. You hook them up to the front battery or the front alternator, and it's a device that limits the amount of power that your back batteries can pull. So something like the Victron Orion, it's a 30 amp DC to DC charger. So you hook the one side up to your front battery, you hook the other side up to the back battery, and when you turn your vehicle on, it sees the voltage on one side get higher, so it takes voltage from that side and charges the other side, but it limits it to 30 amps. So at no point in time can your rig produce the 80 amps that it wants to. So, and then once it sees that the battery's full, it actually stops. So if you're going to charge and you need to charge off your rig, which everybody has it. I actually, on my bus, when I'm driving down the street, I have this little box that charges my back batteries. My batteries are usually at 100%, so it's not needed, but for that one time when my batteries are dead and I need to charge them up, I can start my bus up and it'll charge my back batteries. So that's called a DC to DC charger. There's a bunch of them out there online. One of the more popular, if you want to check it out, is the Victron Orion. Most of the solar companies in town here have other boxes that aren't digital, and they work just as good. I would say they probably run about $100 to $200, and then you just have to have them installed. And it's the safest way to charge your house batteries from your van. But it is something I would recommend doing, having the extra way of charging. This way here, you don't get stuck in Pennsylvania having to use somebody else's generator. Reversing polarity, where normally this doesn't do too much damage. A lot of the new devices will have some kind of protection inside that if you reverse polarity, it'll just disconnect it. You take the wires off, you reverse them back together, and you put them back up there. If your device doesn't have protection, a lot of times you'll see the smoke. All the electronic devices, in case you guys don't know, they all run on smoke. When the smoke comes out of the device, the device is not going to run anymore. That's the way it works, okay? So reverse polarity in such low voltage, at 12 volts and stuff like that, you're probably just going to create sparks. But if you're dealing with the 120 and all that kind of stuff, it's going to be a lot more dangerous. So again, this kind of leads into the point of, I don't think anybody's doing anything on purpose, but a lot of times people think they know more than they know. And I'm just going to say that out loud. YouTube University is great sometimes, until it's not, I guess. So I'd like to say it's as easy as red is positive, black is negative, until you switch to DC. And then it's all backwards. So just, if you don't know what you're doing, just ask somebody for help. I know, again, all the solar companies in town, you can walk in there, and be like, hey, I got this, how should I wire it? And they'll sit down with you for a second and say this and this and this. They don't want you guys to have fires either. So, rushing the installation and not having a monitoring system. Again, it goes back to having the state of charge, knowing where your batteries are. I would recommend that everybody sits down for the first couple of days after having solar installed and write things down. This morning I woke up and my batteries are at 30%. But my solar, by the end of the day, by 5 o'clock, my batteries were back up to 80%. And then the next morning I woke up and they were at 50%. So what you start doing is figuring out how much power you're going to use overnight. So if you're the person that has a big battery bank and is using a generator to charge them up, if you know that you're only using 30% of your battery bank overnight and you have 70 when you go to bed, you don't have to worry about it. You can just go to bed. And next morning when you wake up, you're going to be around 40%. On lithium batteries, that's completely okay. So then you just use a generator the next day to charge it back up. Where rather than worrying it, rather than being at 70 and not knowing how much you use overnight, so you use the generator to bring it up to 100, bothering the people next to you. So if you have some kind of a management system, I'm not saying the big old, $1,000 systems and stuff like that, but if you just have some way to know what your system's doing, it also makes it so that if you have the shunt, say you want to know how much power my refrigerator takes. Well, you plug in your refrigerator, you turn it on, and you look at the app, and it goes from negative 10 amps to negative 40 amps. So that you know that your fridge uses about 30 amps. So you can actually use it for measuring how much power things use and stuff like that also. So, panel mounting as far as flat versus angled versus shading. 10 years ago, the panels used to not have diodes in them. So if you shaded one part, if you shaded one part of the panel, it would kill the whole panel. Or if you shaded one part of this panel, it would take the whole line of panels out, kind of like the old Christmas lights. Well, just like the new Christmas lights that you can have one light out nowadays and the rest of the lights stay on, that's the same way with the new panels. So a lot of people are still under the old impression where I can't have any shading, I can't do this, I have to have everything in the complete sun. The new panels have diodes in them so that if you have one part of the panel that's shaded, you're still going to be able to get power from the other side. That being said, when we install solar systems, we ask people, do you like to park in a certain direction? For me, I like having my door in the sun in the wintertime, so it's nice and warm in the morning as much as possible, and I have my door in the shade in the summertime. So in that situation, I try to make sure that my panels are going to be like that. When we install panels, I ask them, I say, which way do you like to park? So if you have an air conditioner here, and you like the sun to be on this side, I'm not going to put the panel on this side of the AC. I'm going to put it on this side of the AC. So system design and correct panel orientation. If you can get up onto your roof, there's flat mount, which means you can't adjust the panels, and then there's tilt mount, which means you can adjust the panels. If you tilt the panels, especially in the wintertime, you're going to get approximately 30% more power out of the panel. So right now, for everybody that's saying my 100-watt panels only giving me 40 watts or 50 watts, yep, that's what's happening right now. If it's flat on the roof, that's all it's going to give you. If you take that panel and you tilt it towards the sun right now, it's going to bump right up to the 80%, 90% of what the panel says. So being able to tilt your panels, having them in the right direction, you don't want to tilt this panel this way and have this one tilting this way. You want to have everything kind of facing the same way. Tilting, if you have a Class C, Class A, nice roofs and stuff like that, I encourage people to get tilt mounts, even if it's just, if you can't get up there to tilt, I have a 150-year-old guy that comes to me and wants a solar system, and he tells me, I'm never going up there to tilt those panels. I don't need tilt panels. Well, when you send your grandson up there to wash the roof of the panel, he tilts those panels up, cleans underneath the panels, waxes underneath the panels, puts the panels back down, and now your whole roof is nice and maintained again. The other option is if you ever sell the panels, or sell the rig with the tilt mount panels that has a bolt because it's a tilt. So you undo that bolt on all four sides, you take the panels off the rig, and you take them with you. If they're mounted directly to the roof of the rig, the screws and everything in there, you'd have to take screws out, replace screws, make sure everything's waterproof and stuff like that. So tilt mounts are a little more expensive, but in my opinion, they're worth it. Especially in the wintertime, if you have a little van and you're really struggling for roof space because you want to be able to run a refrigerator, but you only have enough room for two 200-watt panels, try to get them tilted. And there's ways that you can put little ladders out there and tilt the panels yourself. The tilting isn't really that hard nowadays. It's pretty easy, and you do get a lot more solar. And you can have winds. I've had my panels up all during these past couple windstorms, and that wind has been whipping these past couple of days. I want to say that might have been some of the biggest winds I've seen here in Quartzsite, and I've left my panels up and they're completely okay. They say you can stand winds up to 35 miles an hour while tilted, and people ask the questions, can I drive around with my panels tilted? And I'm going to say no. Everybody sees it. When people go and driving over there and they're going to dump their rig and they see the panels are up on there, it's different. The movement of the rig isn't like wind. It's rocking them back and forth, all that kind of stuff. So if you have the ability to put them down, I would put them down while moving. I think I'm running out of time.
You only got about 5 minutes for Q&A.
5 minutes. 5 minutes for Q&A. Anybody have a really important question? Not you. No, just kidding. What you got over there? Keeping the panels clean. That's actually another question I get a lot. The only time I've ever washed my panels, and I've had panels on my rig for 6-7 years now. The only time I've ever washed them there was one time when my panels, it was really muggy and humid out. So there was condensation all over my panels. And then I drove and it was dusty out. So it wasn't just a layer of dust on my panels. It was kind of like a thin layer of mud because of the condensation attached to the dirt. That's the only time I've ever washed my panels. That's also one of the other reasons why I build my system bigger than I need. It's for those situations where I don't have to get up there every day and wash them. For snow, you gotta take the snow off and stuff like that. If you live in an area where the trees produce sap, or you have a lot of birds in your neighborhood, you might have to go clean them off more because that will block the sun. But the little bit of dust that happens on our rigs just from normal wind and stuff, the wind takes most of that dust off for us. So if you're struggling for power, maybe go up there and clean them and see what you can do. But other than that, I don't really think it's needed. So the question is if you have two panels and this is the direction of your rig, should you have the panels like this and have the sun go this way, or have the panels like this, I believe, and have them go like this, so that one way it basically reaches the end of the panel and one way it reaches the lengthwise of the panel. If your roof is flat and you don't have any shade, I don't think it matters because both panels are getting the same amount of sun. If you're tilted a little bit, then maybe. But if you're flat panels, I would just try to park so the panels face south. This way here you get as much sun as possible. I think I got room for maybe one more. Face your panels face south, yeah? Yeah. Somebody yell. Flexible panels. They've come a long ways in the past 5 years, but they're still cost for convenience or ease for convenience. Portable panels are great for casitas that don't want to drill into their roofs. Some of these rigs that have really round systems on the top, the sticky panels are great for that. I'm thinking about putting a sticky panel on the hood of my Jeep so that I can charge my car battery and such. I would only use a flexible panel if you absolutely have to. Same thing with portable panels. I would only use them if you absolutely have to. The resin that's on it, they opaque after time, and it's unfortunately, the UV is the stuff that feeds the panel. It's also the stuff that deteriorates the front of the panel. So as you see that panel get opaque, it's going to just drop efficiency, drop efficiency, drop efficiency, and eventually they're going to crack. So floppy panels, flexible panels are decent if you need them, but I would always recommend a hard panel. Yep, VHB tape, I think it's called. Aircraft tape, basically bonding tape. I know a person that had actual hard panels, like stiff panels, VHB tape to the roof of their Class C, and they've been up there 6 years. And they travel the United States just like we do. VHB tape, it's like aircraft tape. RV roof tape, yep, similar.
What's your company, Pete?
I am Van Camping Lifestyle. One more? What you got?
Are all flexible panels pretty much created equal, or are there some that are better than others?
So,
'Cause I've heard about SIGs. I've heard about there's just a number of them. I can't think of it.
ZAMP. So I know ZAMP creates a dynamite product, and I know that they just started creating flexible panels. So I haven't tested flexible panels. I don't have a thorough knowledge of them. If you ask me which one I would buy, I would probably buy the ZAMP just because I know they're a great quality product and that would probably last the longest. But as far as the quality between the two of them, I've dealt with a bunch of them. I've installed a bunch of them, and they all feel the same to me.